Marin County Superintendent of Schools, and I'm very happy to welcome you here. And I want to just take a couple of minutes to express appreciation to the Buck Institute for Education, in particular their board and all that have been working so long for so many years to make sure that we keep our eye on what's really important for kids, and that's project-based. I mean, we all know that, right? But they have never wavered. They've stayed clear. And imagine I have done my best to call John Mergendaler and say, hey, John, what about funding this? And he, no, Mary Jane, this is our target, this is our focus. And as we know, the Institute is known not just across the country, but in the world for their very, very good work, and we're lucky that they're right here in Marin County. If I could ask Don Drake, who should be somewhere in this crowd. Don, might you stand for a minute? So okay. So everybody, this is Don Drake, if you don't know him. He is a high school principal, longtime incredible educator, and he's the principal at Drake High. So just hold that thought, Don Drake, Drake High. But it was because of Don's team who had the opportunity to hear our esteemed speaker that you happen to be here today. So I want you to know that it's one thing to just have a great person come. It's a better thing to have a team of educators say, that's what we're talking about. So I want you to know we're thrilled that you're here. And Don, thanks to you and your team for making it happen. And so at this point, I'm going to turn this over to the treasurer of the Buck Institute for Education, Susan Schilling. Do I have that right? Okay, and let's have a round of applause for her. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. It's my privilege to welcome you to our annual meeting. You maybe didn't know you were coming to our annual meeting. You probably thought you were coming to hear Dr. Gee. Well, welcome to our annual meeting. That's how we got you here. So it's good to have you here. As Mary Jane said, the Buck Institute of Education is a local resource to you and is headquartered here. We have an annual obligation to have an annual meeting in Marin County and to invite the community. So who better to have than the community of educators? So we are here. It's a national organization with an international reputation, and the website is pbl.org, and you can find out everything you need to know about project-based learning and resources and training opportunities. So it's my privilege to introduce to you John Mergendaler, who leads the organization, and he will take us further into the day, and we'll finally get to the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank all of you for spending your time with us. For those of you who know us, I don't need to say very much. For those of you who don't know us, I just want to underline that our mission is to encourage the effective use of project-based learning throughout the world. We've worked in 40 states and 6 countries outside the United States. We do a lot of professional development. You may have seen our publications, Project-Based Learning Starter Kit, Project-Based Learning Handbook, Project-Based Learning in the elementary grades. And then I would also just call your attention to another website, www.bie.org. So I hope there's some resources there that you'll find interesting. And I want to take just a minute to see if there are any questions that people want to ask, and to also point out that we will be here following Dr. Gee's talk. I'm happy to answer questions, go into depth, but if there are any immediate things that someone wanted to ask, I'd be happy to respond. Okay, enough of the folderol before we get started. I've just had the pleasure of having my assumptions challenged for the last hour, and listening to and talking with Dr. Gee, who is a presidential professor at Arizona State, is well known not only just in gaming, but in linguistics, has the interesting background of having stumbled into a half-life study of educational games and gaming through playing a game. And I'd like us all to welcome Dr. G.
Well, I want to start by saying that I'm not going to be talking directly about project-based learning. I'm going to be talking about something I call situated learning. But I think that some forms of project-based learning are the same thing, right? And therefore, in a way, you could construe the talk as advocating a particular form of project-based learning. But before I start talking about video games, which is what I'm here to do, one thing that has interested me greatly of late is I got into this only about 7 years ago with the games, and then all of a sudden, digital media and games have become very, very big. Lots of funding, government work on them. And what's happened, as we've gotten more research, is that digital media, video games in particular, work just like we know books work. It's all the stuff that you know about literacy is true of digital media. And one of the most interesting, so one thing is this: we know, for example, that just handing a person a book and telling them to read the book is not going to make them highly literate. That they need the opportunity to talk and interact around the book. And that's the same with digital media. We're going to see is that handing digital media to a kid will not make them any smarter. They need the opportunity to talk about it and interact with it. So of course, that the ideal literacy situation is a parent sitting and engaging in interactive conversation over a book with a child. Much of the learning is in the conversation and in the interaction, not just in the book. And the same thing is true of digital media. More striking, but also more important perhaps, is there's a very famous effect in literacy called the Matthew effect from the Gospel of St. Matthew, which is the quote, "The rich get richer and the poor get poorer." Literacy has this weird way of working that if you fall behind early, subsequent experiences of literacy just make you worse. And if you get ahead early, subsequent exposure to literacy, you get better and better and better. Right? Because if you're not that good at literacy, you don't understand the next book well, you don't learn anything, you're not motivated, you get to be worse and worse. And if you have early successes, you understand what you read higher and higher and higher things. Now, that effect, the worse you are in literacy, the worse off you get, and the better off you are, the better off you get over time. That Matthew effect is the same with digital media. Right, and one thing we want to know is why. Why do books and digital media work with this Matthew effect? And obviously this is very important for equity, right? We know that a kid who is behind in reading in first grade has an 80% chance of being behind in 8th grade, right? So if you consider that, you say, look, it's a crime to let that child become behind in first grade, right? Yet we have a national policy that every kid should read by 3rd grade, right? Which would mean that for all those who didn't do it by first grade, they'll have an 80% chance of being behind in 8th grade. One of the things you see with digital media for learning and literacy for learning is it really helps to do it right at the beginning, right? It rectifying the mistakes you make in the beginning with these things is very difficult. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Now, one of the things that we all know that the United States has been very good at creating gaps, right? We all know about the traditional literacy gap that between rich and poor. And we have a digital gap. I'm going to tell you what that is. It's not a gap about who has equipment. And we have a knowledge gap in that people can use digital media today to gain knowledge, and some do and some don't. And we have an innovation gap. Supposedly, this is kind of universal for the country, that we're not doing very well with innovation. We certainly have a 21st century skills gap, as rich kids get 21st century skills at home, very often through digital media. But it's not even on offer in the schools. However, these gaps to me, which I used to think as separate things, really are all to me, I come to see them as a mentoring gap. Let me tell you why. In a study that Susan Newman, the former Deputy Secretary of Education, did in Philadelphia libraries, she went in and she said, you know, we can level the playing ground for poor kids by giving the libraries across Philadelphia the very best digital media, science games, math games, 21st century skills, and every kid will have access to it in the poor communities and in the middle class communities, and that will level the playing field. Right? This is a relatively naive belief, and she found out it wasn't true. The kids and the families used the libraries the same amount. In other words, the poor kids did go to the library and they did use the digital media, right? And they were just as interested and passionate about it as the middle class kids. And yet, at the end of the study, their literacy levels had gone down and their knowledge levels had gone down, and the middle class kids' literacy levels had gone up and their knowledge levels had gone up. The Matthew effect. What happened? Why did that happen? Well, it happened because in the middle class communities, the parent, one or more, or both parents, were there and they were scaffolding and mentoring what the kid was doing. They were saying, for example, when you pick something in this computer, pick something slightly above your reading level, a little bit of a challenge. Persist past failure. Don't switch from one thing to another the first time something goes wrong. And relate what you're learning here to the books that are in this library. Right? They were simply mentoring their kid to persist, put in the time, and challenge themselves. The poor families, because you know, in today, in a country with few unions and few good jobs, they had, many of these parents had 3 jobs. They were not there to mentor the kids. The kid picked stuff below his reading level. He didn't persist past failure. He didn't relate different, the stuff on the computer to the books. And so over time, he actually made no progress, while the other ones did. So what you see there is access to the technology didn't make any difference. It's access to the mentoring system. Now, anybody who's taught literacy already knows this, right? That you can't become literate in a school-based way without mentorship. And mentorship takes on the form, in part, of interactive talk with an adult or a more advanced peer. So all of these things are sensitive to the mentoring gap, and there is no panacea in the technologies I'm going to talk about, and the technology of oral interactive talk among people is still the predominant one in the world. It's just that we're going to see that digital media, in particular games, actually give rise to interactive talk that is much deeper than even what books can often do, although people are not really aware of this. So let's start with this, and, because there's something that if you're not, how many of you are gamers? Okay, so we have some gamers, good. We even have some old gamers like me, good, good. One thing that a lot of people who are not into games are not aware of is that today, in the way that people game socially, is the game is not the only thing at stake. Right, and if you're going to contemplate the possible use of games or digital media for learning about learning, you really have to say, wait a minute, don't just look at the game. There's more going on. Now, so I'm going to show you what it is. So anybody played this game? Very, very wonderful game. This is the first one. The second one's out, called Portal. Portal is a game where you use a portal gun to make an orange or a blue portal, and if you go in one, you come out the other, and they obey a whole bunch of the laws of physics for this world, its own physical laws. And you have to use just that. The portal can do a few, like it can pick up a crate. And you have to use just that to get out of a whole series of labs where a maniacal computer is giving you intelligence tests and telling you you can't possibly succeed. And every time you do succeed, she says you're sure to get the next one wrong. And in the end, you find out she's trying to kill you. Now, this was made, I'm not making this up, by a group of graduate students contemplating their graduate education. And it was so successful, the game company not only bought the game, it bought them. They all worked for the game company, and these games have been very successful. So this is a game that is essentially playing with a certain physics, and it's very interesting problem solving, and it's a lot of fun. However, when people look at this, educators, and by the way, this engine is now being released for educators to use. They say, well, I get that this would be a very interesting way to learn some physics, at least at the level of the feel of the physics, right? Because, you know what happens to your body. You have a surrogate body, and you can actually see your body there. And you see what happens to you. So, for example, these portals obey the law of the conservation of momentum. And you actually feel the momentum of your body, and you see what it means to conserve momentum. And people could say, well, surely this is good for tacit understanding, kind of an embodied understanding, but it doesn't mean you could say any physics, right? Right? And as educators say, well, you can't articulate your physics, so what good is it? Well, those people are missing that games today are only half the picture, because what happens in any game that people get passionate about is they play the game and then they get interested in going on an internet site, which I will call an affinity space. I'll tell you why. And discussing that game, modifying the game, researching it, and explicating everything about it. Right? And so you get stuff for Portal, the first Portal, like this. This is a group of people who play Portal who decided to make a wiki to explicate all the physics in it. There are links, like in Momentum, to actual physical definitions in physics textbooks and physics articles. So now you see, whoa, there far from there being no articulation in language of the knowledge being developed in the game, there's a whole community devoted to doing just that. Now, that means it's important for us, and this, by the way, I'm putting this up as a core example because I'm going to argue today gaming involves a game and then a passionate affinity space of people who want to just discuss the hell out of it and research the hell out of it. So this thing that we knew that was so important for books, the interactive conversation with others, is built right into the gaming culture. This is where they're interacting with the language of physics over the game. By the way, they also use the engine that comes with the game to modify it and change its physics. It's a damn good way to test your physics understanding, right? Then you see what happens. So this is pretty common. And as a result, what I want to say to you is that in games today, I use the word little g game for the software. That is just what you saw the picture of. You go to the store and you buy Portal. That's the software. That's the little g game. However, all games today are social, and there is a plethora of social interactions around the game, whether it's in guilds or in chat rooms or on these affinity spaces where people are just explicating it. And those social interactions around the game are referred to by many people in game studies as the metagame. Right? And designers, commercial designers, Halo design, they know very well that today you're designing both. You are designing the software, but you're also designing the interactions. You're letting that game give rise to deep interactions among your players because that keeps them committed. And so I call the combination, that is when you make a game plus a set of good social interactions, the big G game. And I assume that if you're doing project-based education, you are in a sense doing a big P project. That is, there's the project that has got to issue in some product. There's a curriculum, but there's also got to be rich social interactions around that involve talk and explication, right? Now, so this is common. Now, these games, Portal it's a commercial game, right? People made it to make money. As part of their advertising for the first game, they had this ad. The game is designed to change the way players approach, manipulate, and surmise the possibilities in a given environment. Now, what they mean by this is, look, here they almost have a theory of education. I'm going to give you a new tool. It's called a portal gun. We just made it up. You've never seen one before. In fact, none exists in the real world, which is a real shame. But when you take that tool and you look at the world, you're going to see a whole new set of affordances and possibilities for action. Because you plus the tool can do something you could never do alone. So for example, in this game, you have to learn to fling yourself clear across the room to get to ledges. You cannot do that. So you don't even know how to look at this room to make it happen. I guarantee you, 20 minutes of playing Portal, you could look at this room and know exactly how to do it. Right? Because the tool made you see new possibilities for action in the world. Now, I cannot think in a complex world with complex systems and tons of problems that are putting us out of business, global warming, environmental degradation, niche boutique politics, extremism, that what a mess say that school is about giving you new tools that allow you to see new possibilities for action and solutions in the world. That's, by the way, what physics is. Physics is a set of tools. By the way, it's language and it's math are a tool that allows physicists to see the world in a new way so they can do new things to it. Now, we need these for our politics, for our civic life, and for our environment. So I am amazed that, and we've come to the point where dirty capitalists advertise a better educational mission than our schools have. And to do it to make money. Because, you know, saying this is, at least to me, very motivating for playing the game. If the mission had said you will get to fill in a bunch of blanks and take a test later, they wouldn't sell anything. All right. So why I, as a linguist, I'm particularly taken by the fact that these games give rise to these people that get on the internet and begin to use quite technical, specialist language, like you just saw, right? I'm not reading this to you because it's a pain. That is not vernacular English, right? But it's not everyday English. You wouldn't talk that way at the dinner table. You wouldn't talk that way to your buddy at a bar, right? But does that sound like the language of school? Does it sound like what you'd see in a high school textbook? Yeah. So it's what people call academic language, or what I will call specialist language. Now, you say, well, what a weird thing that you would find it interesting that video games, even commercial ones, give rise to people who want to just immerse themselves in technical, specialist academic language. Why would I care? Well, because despite what George Bush the Younger told you, the literacy crisis in America is not due to how poorly we teach phonics. It is due to the so-called fourth grade slump. That is, we are okay at teaching people to pass reading tests, although too late by third grade. But what happens is when that kid who passed that reading test then gets social studies in fourth grade, beginning science in fifth grade, hits the biology and chemistry book in high school, they're not in everyday language, and the person all of a sudden can't read. The real barrier to kids, the most significant barrier to going and getting through high school and on to college, is you better not see language as complex as your chemistry book for the first time in high school. That would be just like teaching high school in Greek and then having a parent say, well, Johnny, you don't need to get ready for any Greek. You'll handle it just fine when you get to high school. If you wanted to get your kid ready, wouldn't you start in first grade getting him ready for the Greek? If you can't get him to stand without Greek, you'd be teaching Greek. Well, it is in Greek. Now, so listen, you see this. Hornworms are little worms kids often use in school to grow for science experiments. So some kid says hornworms sure vary a lot in how well they grow, and another kid says hornworm growth exhibits a significant amount of variation. Which one is in the vernacular? First one, obviously. Every dialect can say that, slightly differently, everyone can say it. The second one is not in everyday language. It isn't that anybody couldn't say it, it's lots of people have no desire whatsoever to say it. Right? If I said to you, one book is written the first way and one the second, which one do you want to take to the beach to read? You're not choosing the second one. The second one is academic language, and what I'm saying to you is if a kid is repelled by that language, they will not get out of high school, and they're certainly not going to college. And that language is not easy to learn. Now, by the way, if you don't know why people use it, it's a real bummer. Think about the difference between those two. The first one is about hornworms. These are cute little worms. They're green, they have little yellow horns. They're cuddly. The second one is about hornworm growth, which is an abstract trait of hornworms that you could measure. It's not cuddly. The first one has processes like vary and grow. Kids love dynamic processes. The other one has abstract entities like growth and variation. But you know the deepest problem with these sentences that shows you that acquiring the second type of language, which is essential for school success, is really not just a matter of linguistics, is think about the basis on which you'd say one. If you say the first one, what are you basing your claim that they vary a lot on? Your hornworms. You see them. You've been living with them. And you say, wow, Susie's really small. And Herman's really big. Right? You're basing it on what you've seen and done. Now, when you say the second one, are you basing it on something you've seen and done alone? No. You're basing it on tools about what counts as statistical significance that are owned by a community that you're not even in. Right? You're making the claim based on what biologists think about significance. And by the way, Herman could be big and Susie could be little, and they still could be significantly not different. Right? You're regularly used to in science having your eyeballs overridden. So the point is, a kid could say, not only do I have to give up hornworms and processes, but I have to make my claims on the basis of tools owned by some other community that I'm not even in. It's not motivating. On the other hand, if you don't get that language. Now, so then it intrigues me that kids who wouldn't spend a minute with that type of language if you didn't force them, go contribute to this. Right? There's a paradox. Now, here's the deeper reason, and this is the only piece of true gobbledygook I have in this talk, and it's sad, but this is the way psychologists write. It's why they don't have friends. But yet the point is just really crucial. What this is from a body of research that's now about 20 years old that shows that when human beings understand anything, whether it's a text or the world, they understand it not by abstract generalities, but by literally being able to run in their head a simulation of images and actions and experiences that the words refer to. So if you really understand the hornworm sentence, the academic one, you don't understand it because you have dictionary definitions. You've been in a lab, you've been using statistical proceedings, and you can see the stuff. You can simulate what happens in an experiment. See? So it's saying comprehension is grounded in being able to run images, actions, experiences in your head. And it turns out, and every teacher here is going to say, I could have told you that. When a human being is doing that, is when they are thinking because they have to get ready to take an action that they want to take, and they want that action to succeed, they think really well. But when you ask them to think about stuff, but there's no action they're going to take, and they don't really care what the outcome is, they think very poorly. Now, the other moral of this that is very important, this says that if understanding is being able to simulate, based on your experience, images and actions in your head, like a little theater in your head. I think of it as a video game because you could actually play a role in it. You know, you could simulate a wedding and you could be the minister. You have to have some experience. See, what happens now, one kid in the classroom has thousands of hours of experience playing with chemistry, and therefore can simulate all sorts of images in their head about the language in the chemistry textbook, and another kid has 14 minutes of experience. You see, in American law, there's a very interesting legal principle that is completely wrong called opportunity to learn. Courts have ruled 2 kids had the same opportunity to learn if they got the same book. But in fact, I'm saying that if one kid has 10,000 hours of experience with the stuff the book's about, like 10,000 hours of playing Portal, that's what the language is about, that kid has a much better opportunity to learn than the kid that has 14 minutes or seconds. One of the things that makes project-based learning important is that you hope the kid is doing a project that requires them to take actions they care about. And you hope you've given them experience that allows them to marry the words to what they've seen and done, right? And if you meet those conditions, we know from laboratory research and also research in real environments that people learn their best. Now, to drive this point home to you, I'll explicate. You know, I should have known it. I actually discovered it when I played video games, even though all the research had already shown it, but shows how much attention I paid. This is from a high school book, not in vernacular either, right? And that's the sort of thing that if you can't read that, you're not going to college. And there have very few people on their own choose to read it, right? Now, and you say, okay, well, they don't because it's hard. On the other hand, I learned the fact that the reason people don't want to read it is not at all because it's hard. It's because they don't have any experience to bring to it. So, and I saw that when I first started to play video games. I was brand new. I was in my 50s, and I was shocked at how hard they were. And like any good baby boomer, I said, okay, I can handle this. I'll read the manual first. And I sat down to read this little 20-page book. And the 20-page book had 199 bolded headings, each cross-referenced the other 198 that were technical definitions. So first of all, I said, wow, this is boring reading. And I remember at this page, remember it's a 20-page book, at page 5 I read that and I said, I give up. I'm bored to tears and I have no idea what it means. I know what every word means. I absolutely can tell you I'm a good enough English speaker to know what every word means, but I have no idea what that is. And I don't even know how I'd recognize those screens if I saw them, right? So I said, I can't play a game. I'm not even literate enough. But I did what every kid would do. I went and played the game for hours, terribly. And then the weirdest thing happened to me. I picked this book up right there, and I could no longer recover why that wasn't crystal clear. I couldn't even recover it anymore. Because I had seen in the game an image, an action, an experience, a goal, a dialogue that fit those words. See, these words are about a world. And if you haven't lived in that world and you can't see it in your mind, these are just words. You can look them up in a dictionary, which is completely useless. All right, now that's exactly what hit me, is that that's exactly true of this. You see, after you've played the game, that manual doesn't seem technical at all. It doesn't even seem worthwhile because you already know it, so you just use it as a reference book. You know, if you miss something, you look it up. I can assure you that people who do this stuff for their living, who are geologists and who play the game of geology, that is, they use the tools of geologists and they go out into the spaces of geology and they do their thing, that they don't think this is hard either. What's hard about it is we haven't lived in the world that it's about. We haven't played the game this is the manual for. And it struck me at that day that the key problem of our schools, more now with No Child Left Behind, is it's full of manuals without the games. We have handed kids all the manuals without the games. And now imagine, now if you did that to gamers, there'd be a revolution. Here's the chemistry textbook. By the way, you don't get to play chemistry. Oh, you can go to a lab, and I'll tell you, by the way, if you come up with this answer, there's only one. You come up with that one, you get an A. You don't care. See, so the fact of the matter actually there isn't any such thing as technical hard language. There's only language you don't know because you didn't live in its world, you didn't play its game. Therefore, in theory, we could level the playing field for the first time in American education if we brought the games to the manuals. And I don't mean a video game. If we brought the activities, the problem solving, the living in the worlds of chemistry and algebra, with making kids want to do things with them, that is to see them as tools to surmise new possibilities. That's the game. And if we brought those to school, they'd like it as well as Portal. Then, by the way, you could not, my theory is, if you brought the games to the school, that is, you gave situated meanings where the kid, for every word, knew an image, an action, an experience, a dialogue that they had seen, they had lived in, you could not get any child to fail a reading test. Think about it. If you have lived in the world for hours, to the point where you can see what that means, you can't fail to comprehend it. You couldn't get a bell curve. That's probably why we don't do it. All right, now, so the principle that I've now got to is that the gaming industry, and now some other people, have caught on to a really fundamental thing, and that is I need to give you the pictures, and then I need to give you the words, like a picture book. I need to give you the experiences. I need to give you the hands-on, embodied feel of stuff, and then I've got to motivate you to go talk your head off about it, because then you learn to articulate it. Now, this is being used now well beyond the entertainment industry. So here is a game called Fold-It. Anybody played Fold-It? Fold-It is made by some scientists who are into folding proteins. Now, if you know about proteins, you know that what a protein does in your body is really crucial. It can kill you or make you healthy. And a protein folds into a given shape. And each shape would give rise to different effects, some of them lethal, some not. The optimal shape of a protein is at its lowest energy state. Here's the kick. Any protein sequence of acids can fold into billions of different shapes. So scientists who do this stuff have these supercomputers that run through all the possibilities, looking for the lowest energy state so they can get the ideal shape for the protein. And they actually have little contests here. They each bring their supercomputer and they see for a new protein if they can discover its optimal shape. So somebody had the wonderful idea, why not make a game? And in the game, you get little 3D proteins, and you just fold them. And every time, you literally just fold them and look for patterns, and every time you get a low energy state, that little piece turns bluer. And you just see if you can find the bluest state. You can find the state with, and so you're not using what computers do, running every possibility. You're using humans' pattern recognition. Now, there is no more powerful intellectual tool in the world than human beings as pattern recognizers. In fact, it's too powerful. We find patterns where there are none, right? So people play this for fun. But the scientists said, what? Maybe they'll discover new shapes for proteins we've never known about, right? So two things have happened, just what you'd expect. A certain constituency wants to go talk their heads off about it and study it. So here is a chat room. And the guy is making a very interesting suggestion. He's saying, given what I now know about proteins, this game is only good for one aspect of discovering their structure. It's not good for the 3D part. That would be better to use a Wii because you can push and pull in this direction, not just in this one. He's actually making a suggestion about how to improve the game and how to improve the science. And by the way, you can go on this site and get as technical about proteins as you want. Now, here's the interesting thing. This even appeared in the New York Times. One of the people who designed this has given a talk recently where he said he predicts that the day will come where one of these gamers will win the Nobel Prize. Because when the scientists bring their big computers in, the gamers now win a lot of the slots. Right? These are amateurs. They don't have a PhD, but they win some of the slots. Right? This is very characteristic of popular culture today. Amateurs who are given a good designed product, but then get a passion to go talk about it, often become better than experts, especially if they're collaborating with each other, as they do here. They share information. They do the game socially. All right, another example. We don't teach social science anymore. We don't teach civics because we don't test them. However, interesting enough, anybody know what this game is? Best-selling game in history. It's outsold Grand Theft Auto many times, even though you would never know that from the media because you think the only game ever made was Grand Theft Auto. The Sims is the best-selling game in history, and the majority of its players are women. And in The Sims, you do some interesting stuff. You have to simulate a community. You have to build your own family and community and life. And you have to design your own houses, your own furniture, your own architecture, your own environments, or you can buy them in stores. But you can get a tool to build them yourself if you want to do it yourself. And furthermore, you can also take pictures of your Sims and write graphic novels, essentially, with it, right? So now one of the things, so as you might imagine, people play The Sims, but equally they go into these affinity spaces to talk about it and do stuff. And one of the things that I think is very interesting is sometimes they give each other challenges. They say, okay, here's the challenge. You have to play the game this way. And if you play it that way and meet all the conditions, then you win the challenge. And here is one challenge a German woman gave to a bunch of English and American women. She had read Barbara Einbuch's book, Nickel and Dime. Anybody read that? It's an interesting book about how hard it is to be poor. And she said, you have to play The Sims and get through your entire life where your kids get out of the house healthy, you get a premium if they go to college, and as a single parent. And since this is a commercial game, this is extremely hard to do in the game because being poor is not fun. The game is made to have fun, so they did not build it to let you lead a poor life. So you have to, she has like 90 pages of rules, which you can and cannot do in the game, so that you simulate the life of poverty. And she got hundreds of players, many mothers and daughter pairs, doing it. And so here's her goal. You got to raise the kids successfully. And here is one of the 90 pages of rules. Now what I want you to see here, because this is a really interesting modern thing that goes against our current obsession with STEM. You know, the idea we should teach science and math, screw ethics, screw civics, screw art. They're not separate. in the digital world outside of school. This woman knows the software, the programming very deeply. So she's telling you exactly at the technical level what can and cannot be done so that you will get a good simulation. But she also understands the art of it, the social science of it. She has to be good at technical stuff and humanities stuff. And this is pretty typical of modern stuff out of school. Kids today often do science and non-science together. I'll show you another example later. Now, in that, this is something separate. In that challenge, it's one step further. If you succeed at the challenge, you have to write a graphic novel. That is, take pictures of your Sims, Photoshop them, and then write a graphic novel about what happened to your family, but how the simulation, the game as a simulation, intersected with what happened. To finish. And she has dozens of. See, now, I ask you, does that seem like a good social science assignment? For you project-based people, does that seem like a good project? People are doing this for fun. They're not in school. They're doing it for fun. They're actually understanding the underpinnings of poverty, but also how simulations can or cannot work, plus how graphic novels could represent that. Outside of school for fun, when it seems to me like the Portal thing, again, just a really great school assignment. All right. This is the most played multiplayer game now in the world. Anybody played this one? Anybody lose their marriage over this one? I mean, there is now this is World of Warcraft, 15 million players. There is now a whole occupation of psychotherapists who treat World of Warcraft addiction. See, it gave rise to a new profession, a new client base. It's that popular. To do it. Now, what is it? It's a role-playing game that has some interesting properties. Role-playing means you have to play this with other people. You don't have to, but you do play this with other people. The basic unit is 5 people. Now, each of the 5 people are called a hunting party. Now, and each of the 5 people, each one has to have a deep skill set, which they've chosen to specialize in those skills. And it has to be different than the other 4. So if you cannot bring into the so-called dungeons, that is where you're going to go play and do challenges and fight, you can't bring in 5 people with the same skill set. The problems are designed that they're hard, and they can only be solved if you integrate 5 different skill sets. See, so I was a priest, a healer. You bring in 5 priests to a dungeon, and you die in 2 seconds. Right? The idea, first of all, is each person must be deeply skilled in one skill set, but has to understand the big picture so they can integrate their skill set with the very different skill sets of the other people. Now, why is this interesting? Because in the world of high-tech work, this is called a cross-functional team. If you go look at the new capitalism and high-tech workplaces, they're almost all organized in cross-functional teams, which means every member of the team has to be an absolute expert, but able to understand everybody else's role so they can integrate with it, and even replace them if they're gone. Now, in work, this is considered extremely high stress. Then you go home to play World of Warcraft to do it again. Humans are perverse. Now, but there isn't, just like all the other things I've told you, there is many affinity spaces that want to discuss World of Warcraft and do an enterprise that they themselves call theory crafting. See, World of Warcraft is a big game which has, in every event in it, everything you do, every click of the keyboard creates a bunch of statistics that all have to be integrated to predict the result. And that statistical model underlyingly is hugely complicated. In fact, the designers no longer fully understand it because it's been changed. Players try to figure the entire thing out and then improve it. I didn't use it this time, but I have this wonderful kid who figured out some of it and sends out a 5-page letter to the company as a complaint in technical statistical language saying you got this wrong. Right now, so this is a piece of the theory crafting. And by the way, there's just thousands of pages. So they are doing probability theory, statistical theory. They are, mathematics, the whole thing, totally for fun. Right? By the way, probability and statistics is one of the hardest things to teach people because humans think horribly about probability. We're programmed wrong to do it. And here we have whole communities, kids debating statistical theory. By the way, all of whom think they can then improve the game over what the designers do. So now, did you really think we'd ever come to a day where kids and people 20 and 30 together want to not just play a video game and be an elf, but they want to go home and theory craft around probability theory and statistics? And yet they go to school and they turn their nose up and say, it's too hard, right? So again, this is an affinity space, and again, what you see is all the stuff that we think is highly valued in school and that we test on is being developed out of the social interactions around the game. Not being taught directly. The people go make it up themselves. All right, theory crafting. Now, I'm going on too long, so Chibi Robo, great. Let me think of a way to end this so I don't bore you further, but so, well, let's just take one thing. I'm talking about a form of learning that is neither liberal nor conservative. Because liberals say you should just let kids do what they want to do, immerse them in rich practices, and just leave them on their own. And conservatives say you should just tell them everything. In fact, neither one works. What you need is to have people immersed in doing stuff, but where there's got good guidance, good mentoring, and high structure, so that the person is guided and scaffolded towards success. So good learning is actually based on both structure and freedom. And video games are masterful at this, because what they do is, there is a teacher in a video game. Absolutely, and it's the game designer. They have designed the world to guide you to reach certain solutions. For example, one of the things they always do, and they know this as well as any cognitive scientist does, don't start the person with a particularly complex problem, because humans are so creative, they'll find a solution to it that never works again. Start them with the problems that will lead them to the most fruitful hypothesis that they're going to need later. Don't send them down a garden path. And that's why there's level design in games. So the game keeps guiding you. It's very designed to scaffold you, helps you, gives you hints, and guides you in certain directions. The early levels are virtually training things, because it knows you have to learn two things: how to persist past failure, not to give up, but also how to not take failure as a bad thing, right? And you can't make a person fail all the time at the beginning to do that. So the teacher is the design. On the other hand, the way they're designed, you always feel you're doing it, right? There's this kind of beautiful thing that you've got a handler. Mommy's there, but you don't know she's there. That's how you teach reading too, right? The mother is scaffolding the interpretations and stuff, but the kid thinks he's doing it, right? It's the same thing. The designer is doing that interactive thing and then lets you loose once you passed enough boss battles, then you can go on your own. Now, in a sense, this is where one place where I think games are very relevant to project-based learning, because a game has projects, and a very interesting thing. First of all, you start a game, and you have goals that are not yours. They were made by the designer. The designer says, like in Portal, here are some problems you're going to have to solve. The goals come from the designer. Then good games say, however, there are also goals you can make up, right? You can play this game in different ways. There are different solutions. So there's two types of goals. There's the goals that are just imposed on you, and there's the goals you make up to be the type of player you want to be. So I can be in World of Warcraft a priest, which means I'm going to play the game entirely differently than you're going to play it in some other role. So there's both of those type of goals, but just as in school, see, most of the time in school, all you got is the imposed goals. Now, the designer knows, though, imposed goals don't work that well. If I give you a goal and say, you got to do this, most of you are going to say, I didn't choose to do that. Why should I do it? Not just because Jim says so? No, not at all. The game is built in such a way that even for the goals that the designer has given you, which are necessary because they're the ones that are going to teach you to get ready to make up your own goals and know what counts as a good performance, you project onto those goals your desires, you accept them. The game is made, and that's why it has a story, and that's why it has interactions. It makes you play a character whose goals those are, so that as you play it and as you choose even how to play it, you come to project into even the goals imposed on you how you want to play and who you are as a character. The game, that's why it has a world, that's why it has a story, because it says you aren't going to take my goals unless they are lucid and meaningful to you and you come to actually adopt them as your own. And how are you going to do that if you don't even know why you have them? And you don't know what they look like in the world. So that's why a game comes with a world. Now, you can do this with anything. This is one of my favorite all-time games. I bet you nobody's played this, though, but Chibi Robo. You should all go home and play it. So now, Chibi Robo is a game where you play a 4-inch house cleaning robot. You get to clean the house, and you earn happiness points for cleaning the house, and you can't win unless you get enough happiness points. Now, by the way, it is really hard to clean a house when you're 4 inches tall. How do you even get to the top of the chest of the drawers, let alone the chandelier? Now, the other problem is, as you see, Chibi has a cord, and he can only stay out so long, and he runs out of power until he finds an outlet. Even worse, Chibi he is a house cleaning robot working for a family that is dysfunctional. They're going to get a divorce. The little girl in the family is so traumatized, she's in a frog suit and can only say ribbit. And Chibi has to solve their social problems to make the family happy again. Now, so here are the way in which in school, most of the goals, when you impose them on the kid says, I don't even know why we're doing this. You would think, I know this, some mother told us. So I went to my teenage kid and say, by the way, we're going to play a game. You're going to clean the house. This is not going to work. Right? This game makes you want to clean that house, unfortunately. Makes you want to. You can't stop doing it. It's designed in a way that you want to do. You are Chibi Robo, and you know why you're doing it, and you know in the world, and there's always something to find out and do. So the person knows, I've got to make you want those goals by wanting to be that character. And this is the heart of all learning, project based on identity. You can't learn algebra unless you can take on identity that says, I know why people do algebra, I know what those goals are for, and they're mine because I want to build a roller coaster and I want it to work and I'm going to use the algebra to do it. And you told me just the algebra I ought to use to begin, but I want my roller coaster running. Right? See, so games say, don't just let anything go. Structure's okay, but you still got to get that person to buy that structure as their own, and that's why you create lucid meaning, identities, and a world around it. So Chibi Robo is very, very good for that. And the other thing Chibi Robo is good about, and I'll end with this, is what really, for this type of learning, that is where it's situated, I'm putting a person in a world so that they give language, situated meanings, I bring experience, images, actions to language, so I can use the language to do stuff. That is for actions I want to take and whose outcomes I care about and succeed. It runs flat up against our school system today, as you are very well aware. And the thing that stops us from putting in learning in school that is as good as the learning in Chibi Robo is our assessment system. Because if we keep assessing just a bunch of inane facts or solving problems no one cares about, then we can't put any, we have to teach to that. And so it has become clear to me that anybody who wants to reform education has got, whether you like, and I said today in the meeting with the Buck Institute, assessment is certainly the most boring topic in education. But it's the most important because unless you change how we assess people, it doesn't matter what you do, right? And we are in an age now with digital media where we can radically change assessment. In fact, I believe that we can make the entire assessment industry go out of business. Think about the savings. It would pay the deficit right there. Now, why? Why do I say that? Because, until I got involved with games, I took it as kind of obvious that a kid would take 12 weeks of algebra, and then some guy in Illinois would make up a test, and the state would give it to the kid and say, whether he learned algebra or not, and the teacher was there for 12 weeks, but so what? You'd think she would have known, wouldn't you, after 12 weeks? Pre-theoretically, why do I need the guy from Illinois to come in and tell me if the kid knows algebra if the teacher's been there 12 weeks? Well, we know why. We don't trust the teacher. So, but I took that as normal. Seems, You want to know, did the kid learn any algebra? Until I started to play games. Now, I guarantee you this. How many people have played Halo? Okay. Halo's hard, even when you play it in normal. You play Halo on hard, you're in for a maniacal time. Now, in any game like that, you can't get to the second level unless you mastered the first. Literally, there's no grade promotion, right? No game says at the end of the first level, you know, I feel sorry for you. You've been such a schmuck, and you know, and by the way, you know, your parents play bingo all the time, so I'm going to let you get to the second level. It doesn't work that way because you couldn't do the second level. So if you play Halo on hard and you get to the end, would anybody say now we should give the kid a Halo test? Hey, wait a minute, he just took the test. But why then? Why, when we find it ludicrous to say that a kid who finishes Halo should take a Halo test, do we say it's perfectly reasonable they should take an algebra test after they've played thousands of hours of algebra? It's because we think the game is better designed than the school. We trust the design of the game that you can't get out of it without mastering it. Imagine, and we would have to re-professionalize teachers to do this, imagine we put in learning, embedded it in schools, that was as well designed as Halo that you couldn't finish your algebra and not know it, right? And that you would laugh as much when I said, wow. It's like, you know, I think of this, imagine some middle school kids took on problem-based learning and they were going to make a nuclear bomb. And lo and behold, they make it, but unfortunately it goes off, it kills them and their whole city. You would never say, too bad it went off before we could test their knowledge of physics. Maybe ethics or maybe safety you would. But you know, isn't this the point that a good project says if you got that bomb to go off, you must know physics, right? And that's what games are about. If we design learning so well that finishing it guaranteed you were successful, we wouldn't need the testing industry at all. Literally no difference between good learning and good assessment. They're only divided because we haven't had the technology to make that type of learning before, but we have it now. I can guarantee you we have it now. You could go make a game tomorrow where kids used calculus to design roller coasters and stuff and then had to articulate their knowledge in an affinity space. And you'd be guaranteed by the time they had built them and taught others that you might as well just send them their AP calculus exam. Right? Because you're guaranteed to know calculus, otherwise the roller coaster wouldn't be rolling. And their affinity space would not have had no language in it. So my final thing to you is, if I can get this to work, is that teachers, we're only going to solve the problem of schools and the equity problem where all kids get deep situated learning when teachers become designers. Designers of other people's learning, and learning so rich that we don't need anybody from Illinois. Thank you.
And learning, but where the players have to do actions offline, that's more than just the chat, but some type of activity, experience that they then have to bring it back into the game.
Regularly done in the gaming thing. I'll show you it. It's called modding. If I can get back to the... Okay, so this slide, the World of Warcraft slide, you won't know this if you don't play, but I'll just tell you. So the game is little elves running around. You can see them back there. You see the game is a thing. You see all this print and these tables? That's not the game. The game is back there. Now, this is a slide from a higher end, real aficionado players. They're going into guilds where the standards are very high. Every one of those tables you see on there is called a mod. And what they are is they are little devices that tell you while you're playing how you are manipulating the statistics of the game and whether you are doing the best you could do for your character in relationship to all the others. So at this level of play, the people in the thing, and there could be 5 to 25 people in this working together, they are reading this stuff to see where they're being weak and where they're being strong in their skill sets. And also to test that everybody else is doing the best they can. If they're not, if one of them, for example, is a damage meter, and it shows you the statistics of how much damage you're doing per second. Now, as a priest, I'm supposed to do 0 damage per second, because I'm supposed to be healing you, not having fun. And if they see I have any damage, they'll throw me out of the dungeon. On the other hand, if you're another character, you have to have a particular type of statistics if I know you're behaving at the highest level. And so it's a way to find free riders. somebody who's getting the benefit but isn't doing their job. So all of that is the theory of the game. And these guys are so good. Notice that you can't even see the game anymore, that their theory ate the game, and that they're actually thinking at a very abstract level about the statistics while they're playing to get. Now, every one of those little devices is called a mod, and every one is made by a player, not the company. That affinity space has as one of its things you can choose to do is make one of those mods and see if the community will use it. And then they debate all the time whose mod is better and who. So you absolutely have a project here in which people say, can I get such a good theory of the game that for some part of its statistics, I can make a device that allows you to play better by thinking while you're playing about what you're doing at a general theoretical level. And that's all made by consumers. Yep.
To clarify a little bit more, what I meant also was for someone going out of the game,
Yeah.
a student going into the community or into the school and having to engage in some other activity out of the game, away
Right.
from the
Yeah,
frame,
okay,
but
so
somehow
that's-
brings knowledge back into the game.
Right, yeah,
experientially.
that's very popular today, and it's called gamification. It can be good or bad because you can also dupe people to do it. But it's very popular now to turn real-world activities like civic activism into a role-playing type game where you can go from fictional worlds to the real world. So the best book on that is Jane McGonigal's book, Reality is Broken. That's what it's about, doing that. Now, like all trends, like all technology trends, you can do that stuff for great good and you can do it for evil. Right? I can motivate you to do bad things or good things. But yes, that carrying over to the real. There's also types of game called augmented reality games where the game is on a screen, but it's in a mobile device, and the screen is actually using the real landscape and putting fictional stuff on it. You move and do stuff both in the real world and in the fictional world. The line between the game as fiction and the world is just getting very porous, very porous. Yeah, there's a question here.
What are some ways that games sustain the interest of a player during the really frustrating or discouraging portions of the game?
Yeah, this is a great question because games are, and by the way, I think the book is called Got Game, but there's a book that just came out by some psychologists that actually did experiments on why games are motivating. And what they show is that the game is built to fulfill the human needs, like your need for agency, your need to feel your actions count. And the games manipulate the sort of higher order needs of humans in a way that they feel motivated to do stuff. But the key thing a game has to do is rearrange your view of failure. Because games are a type of failure-based learning. If you see failure as bad, or you see it means you're not a gamer, or you're no good, you will give up the game. And unfortunately, schools have taught many of us that failure is bad and to be avoided. And so games all do stuff in an intricate way to get you to see that failure is a form of learning. In fact, so much so that in a boss battle, if you took a game and you won every boss battle the first time, you just return the game as too easy. You expect to fail in the beginning, but you expect the one thing you demand as a gamer, that when I fail, I will have gotten feedback that tells me how to do better the next time. Right? I won't be left there saying, and I have no idea whether I will do it better or worse the next time. Right? And games are very good at that, saying, okay, it wasn't really a total failure because you caught on to a piece of the pattern. So even when you fail the next time, you know you did better. And games put you into a state of flow, which we already know is highly motivating. So there's not one answer to your question. Basically, the answer to your question is game design. It's all the features of games. They know there's no learning without motivation. And there's no learning without persisting past failure and putting in a lot of time. So they have to manipulate you to do that, and they do it in many ways. If you email me, I'll send you the name of that book, because they actually list the and any educator will read that and say that course. See, one is clearly humans want to believe they're agents, that their actions count and matter, that they're not just looking at other people, and yet so often in school you don't think your actions matter. Sometimes you don't even know what would make them matter, right? The other thing, but in a game, your actions always matter. Games must make your choices consequential. And it's what I would assume a crucial principle of project-based learning or any other situated learning, that the child must see choices they make as consequential, that they could matter, and that you understand when they failed, why they failed. Yes, there was somebody over here.
Do you see any communities out there of teachers as designers? And is this actually, taking off? Are people actually designing the
There are
kinds?
a lot of little communities arising where teachers are doing this themselves, because there's actually a number of teachers who make games to learn, and so they're there. But it is absolutely the case that I think the biggest thing that No Child Left Behind on the accountability regime did, and what it was meant to do, its goal was to deprofessionalize teachers. And we've gone a long way into that deprofessionalization. So to me, the solution to getting situated in deep learning in school is the reprofessionalization of teachers, not bringing another panacea, not more in-service. And the way to do that is for teachers to be able to join passion and affinity spaces. See, one thing I didn't tell you, there's a book that I wrote with my wife called Women as Gamers, that is about these passion and affinity spaces. And the best ones are not age-graded. The affinity space has older people and younger people. It also has experts and newbies, and sometimes the newbie is young or old. They're not age-graded, and so therefore there's always people more expert than you that can help you, and vice versa. So you learn, and the community, by the way, sets its own standards, usually very high, and it shows you what they look like. So teachers, to me, need passion and affinity spaces where they can become designers and mentors and resources of people's learning as true professionals again, and not have outside forces do it. They need to get as good at this as World of Warcraft is. And that says you don't need any experts. You just need good social organization for learning. People are trying to start that. They're trying to get the government to put money behind it. We're trying to get foundations to put, and I guarantee you will see them. They're coming. But the thing to watch out for is only join one where there's not people telling you what to do, where the knowledge flows out of your interactions with other people, because that's the ones that operate best. But we don't have them yet. Have them like for every other thing. There's one on avocado carving for art. There's no topic other than teachers as professionals that it doesn't have one. See, because it's very dangerous to have teachers be professionals, very dangerous, because then all the other people who make money supervising education, curriculum people, politicians, people like me, ed researchers, we go out of business. And we like our homes and food. Any other question?
Yeah. Hi, I just wanted to speak to that question. I currently, my whole program in my classroom is designed around gaming.
Great.
My student is autistic, and he was very resistant to any academic work, and but he was involved in Pokemon,
Sure.
Various games. Right now is I can't remember the game,
Minecraft.
Minecraft, thank you. So he becomes very fixated on that. And so what I do is, okay, go ahead and explain to me tell me the story. And the excellent part about it is he's teaching me.
Right.
He has to break it down to a level of my understanding. And I keep taking it down further. I still don't understand, help me out.
Right.
And to a point where I understand it, but I'm also teaching him how to write, to explain to me, and it's a level that most people don't understand. It's phenomenal.
It is phenomenal. That is teaching as designing, and that's how good parents read to their kid. They're not afraid to have the kid teach them something, right? One of the Pokemon was probably the best reading curriculum ever made, and it violates every rule of the George Bush reading program. Every rule. Think about it. It's a game that's at least the 8th grade level, if not higher, and you have to read to play it, and yet 5-year-olds want to play it and they can't read. But that's the first game that when it was a big fad. Every 5-year-old wanted Pokemon, and mom would say, but you can't play Pokemon because you can't read, and the kid, he'd cry, he'd whine, he'd get Pokemon, and then what's happened? The mother is stuck there reading 8th grade language to the kid. Could not be better. Then, second stage, the mother can't figure out what in the hell to do in the game, but the kid can. And the kid's then saying, Mom, didn't you get it? You're supposed to collect 99 of these, not just one, right? And then, third stage, the kid says, geez, I love Mom, but I could do so much better if she wasn't here. And the only way to get rid of her is to read. And then they read immediately. Right? See, there's a lot of evidence just coming out that not games and virtual worlds like Second Life are very good for some autistic kids, because they can socialize and do stuff under other identities that are much less threatening to them. You know, I love this thing because autistic and ADHD kids often do very well with video games, but then they say they're overly, see, you say they can't focus. Then when they do it, you say they're too focused. Like when I started this, I love to tell this story. I went out and had my graduate students interview kids playing, because I had this image they'd all be bad at school. Turns out most of them were good at both. And, but we ran into one kid, he was 12 years old, severely ADHD. And he had a brother, and they were playing the big multiplayer game at the time, EverQuest. And the older one had this idea that it wasn't programmed aesthetically. So he in a club hacked into the game, stole all their code, redid it, and gave it away free. Very illegal. You went to the site, you couldn't convict him because no one could understand that it was like a super PhD level. But the 12-year-old decided he'd get into the, understanding the hacking of the game. And in this type of game, there's a mathematical algorithm that's hidden to tell you how good the drops will be. If you kill a monster, you can either get something good or bad, and you want to vary it. So the kid says, well, if I could figure that algorithm out, I could get in the game only when there's good drops. And he took 12 straight hours to hack into the game. Now, he's ADHD, 12 straight hours, and discovered the algorithm. But he got caught by Verdant, the company that makes it, Persona. And they called his father. And they said, do you realize your kid has hacked into our proprietary property and found an algorithm that nobody else has been able to find or understand? And the father was trembling, going to say, and he said, we're really trying to decide whether to send him to jail or hire him. This is a 12-year-old. See, but then the therapist, well, you overfocus. Well, in the modern world, better to overfocus than underfocus, right? In the world we got now, I'm very convinced if you have a passion for something and you spent 10,000 hours on it, and you've gotten very skilled, you'll be fine. It doesn't really matter what it was. I mean, there is one for carving avocado pits as art. I'll bet you there's only 2 people with that passion and skill in the world, and there's probably 3 jobs for it. So they're in great shape. Yes.
Hold on, there's a mic right there. Hold on.
Okay.
Thanks. I really appreciate so much of what you've said here about improving teaching and learning. And several things that I'm going to carry away, helping kids push past failure and bring experience to language and promoting teachers as designers. My question is, what I've gotten out of your talk, perhaps most of all, is gaming as a metaphor for how to improve education. And in my own mind, trying to see the distinction between having kids succeed designing a roller coaster, for example, in the virtual world, and designing an actual mini roller coaster using objects in real time with real people in the same place. Yeah. So, can you comment on...
Yeah, that's a great question. I was at a dinner once, and a graduate student just raked me over the coals and said, people should be doing stuff in the world. Everybody should have a cow. And I was saying people should play Harvest Moon, where you get a cow. And I said, I'd like to have everybody... I think everybody should have a cow. But we realistically can't give everybody a cow, but everybody can run a farm in Harvest Moon. That doesn't mean I'm not, if you can run a real farm, go run a real farm. So you're dead right that I'm talking about gaming as a metaphor. Now, there's a guy, you can look this guy's stuff up, his Brianna Coller, C-O-L-L-R, at Northern Illinois University. He teaches high-level mathematics for engineering. And he does it all through a video game where you have to program cars to do races. And your car must race on any track, no matter what shape. And then he gives you challenges. And you can see this on the internet. It's wild. Challenges. You must design a car that can race on anything. But there are Hummers on the track that can block you. But you can't see the Hummers. But you have a little Volkswagen Bug that can go out and see them and tell you where they are. You have to program that whole thing. By the way, he's designed this because it requires very, it's just the math you were supposed to learn. Now, the final project is you got to build a real car that will do it. Got to do it real. Now, he does a study, because the way they teach math is you have a textbook about this big, and all it is problems. And he's shown that his kids doing the gaming thing learns the math much more deeply than the people doing the textbook. Now, the thing is, the textbook covers a lot more, but they didn't learn any of it, right? And then the school, the engineers can do a final project, and they all choose to use the game best to do it. Now, he also found fascinating that women learn the mathematics of engineering just as well as men when you teach it that way. right? Because you're teaching it in a meaningful context. But it naturally lends itself to go into the real world. Once you got those skills, you actually can build a real car to do it, and you do. So yeah, that's important. I'm not against the real world. I've been in it every once in a while.
I recommend people looking at Quest to Learn School too, because they have their whole curriculum, based on learning design theory. My question to you is, I would ask you to elaborate a little bit more on identity in learning and how identifying as a learner helps you learn.
Yeah. So Quest to Learn was designed by a game designer named Katie Salen, and MacArthur Foundation supported it, and they're starting another Quest to Learn in Chicago this year. So it's all based around the stuff we've been talking about. See, identity is crucial for this reason. Let me give you an example from a game, and again, it's metaphorical. So when I'm going to talk about a game where you're a SWAT team member, but you just put in algebra. Okay? So there's a game called SWAT 4, which is really, really a great game. And you are a SWAT team guy with 3 others, and they're played by the computer. And you have to order them around. And you have to play exactly the way SWAT people do in the real world. You can't shoot any hostage. You can never even shoot anybody unless they have a gun on you, and you've warned them several times to put the gun down. And if you go into a room and any of your people are hurt, the game ends right there. Okay? So you have to play by the rules. And notice you have an interesting problem when you play this game. The 3 characters have artificial intelligence. They know how SWAT people go into rooms, and they look good. But you're the one ordering them around, and you know nothing. Right? So you start the game where your knowledge is 0, and they've got most of it. So you order them around, and they die, but they looked good doing it because they went in the room right. But they're teaching you. And then you try stuff and you film. Pretty soon you've got 20% of the knowledge. At the end, you've got 50-50 in the knowledge. And they have been scaffolding you and teaching you. Now, in the beginning, think about it. This is just as a kid starting. I'm starting SWAT, just like algebra. I'm starting SWAT. I don't know any. So why in the hell should I learn it? Now, you just told me what the goals of SWAT are and what the rules. You know, you have to go in a room without being seen. You cannot. I'm saying, why would I want to be Rambo. I just want to go shoot everybody. Why can't I do that? See, so what is going to make sense to you of the rules that SWAT people play by and the goals they have? The identity of being a SWAT person. Why do they have those goals? Why do they? So the game does a wonderful thing of saying, here's what it means to live in the world as a SWAT person. And from where you stand as a SWAT person, these goals and these rules make sense. And you see how they're then a very interesting tool set for solving problems. The identity is there to make sense of the tools you're going to use, the goals you're going to have. Now, if you have no identity, so translated to algebra, I come in and I say, you know, we're going to have goals in algebra, and we're going to have tools, and we're going to have stuff we have to do. But the kid's just like, well, he doesn't know any algebra, and he says, why would I want to do that anyway? Why would anybody do that? You're going to solve a quadratic equation. So what? I mean, see, he's got no place to stand. He's got no, and the only thing is you'd have to show him, here's what people who are into this stuff do with algebra. See, so you can go, in this book on women, we look at a woman who failed her high school geometry class. But then she became one of the leading designers in Second Life, where the 3D tool to design requires you to use geometry. But it's beautifully built to display the different geometric properties so you can see what the rules are doing. She's now an expert designer and loves geometry, considers herself quite good at it. See, but isn't it weird? In a course called geometry, she learned nothing. And in a thing called Second Life, she learned geometry. See, this is one of our flaws. We think you can only learn X in a course called X. And X is always a name Aristotle invented. I mean, yes. Any other questions? Let's take one last question. If just not print, writing, handwriting would ruin all of the human mind. Everybody who's mastered the previous technology thinks the next one will ruin everything. And by the way, there always are losses. When we went to print, we lost stuff from the age of handwriting because it meant you had to memorize stuff and play it in your mind. And you had to read a book twice. When the age when you wrote the books out, you only owned like 5 books. So you read them 12 times. That was actually good. And by the way, you didn't write a book that was trivial because it was too hard. So you had 5 good books and read them over and over again. That was probably good. Now you can have 5 million books and read them each once. By the way, when print came in, the elite said it would give rise to only, two things: rebellion and pornography. Now, it certainly gave rise to pornography. Every new invention humans use first for pornography. But what really turned out to be revolutionary is it gave rise to missiles for private devotion used by women who sat silently reading and devoting in their own mind in an age where people had used to only read out loud. And that private devotion of women, where they could make up their own minds and no one knew what they were believing, and form their own relationship to the church, that turned out to be revolutionary. But the pornography didn't. Second Life has a lot of pornography. See, pornography loses its value quickly. I mean, if I was God, I would have invented much more interesting things than sex. But, in the beginning they do it. So, but the thing is this too, that people assume that any technology like a book or game is good or bad. It's neither. You can do real evil with a book, and you can do real good, and vice versa. So never, if a person says, this technology's bad, they're just as dumb as the people who say it's good. It depends what you do with it. See, people always say, well, video games lead to violence. Well, if I asked you, how many people do you think have been killed because somebody played a video game, what would you think the number would be? If I gave you like 8 versus 8 million, it's 8. Maybe 9, maybe 6, I don't know. How many people have died because of how somebody read the Bible or the Quran? It may be a billion, right? I mean, it's hundreds of millions. So far, video games are new. They don't have anything like the power of books yet. People think God wrote a book, right? They just disagree which one it is. But no one thinks he designed a video game. So, the fact of the matter is, because we're so used to books, we take them to be benign. They're not benign at all. They're a very powerful technology. And in the wrong hands, they can do great evil. As impressed as we are by the internet, we think the internet has changed our culture greatly, and it certainly has. It's arguable, though, it hasn't changed our culture or economy anything like the invention of the washing machine did. See, this stuff is new. It isn't up to the power of the old stuff yet. It will be. But we think the old stuff's benign because that's our stuff, right? But yes, the day that people killed 400 million people in the name of Grand Theft Auto, it will finally be powerful as a book. But why would you want to? You can kill them in the game. You don't need. By my playing violent video games has saved dozens of administrators' lives. Dozens. All right, thank you.